ITL Teaching and Learning series, and this is a collaboration with Chris Bush. And Chris, I don't know if you want to turn your camera on, feel welcome. Chris Bush is led a grant application to Universities Canada with the goal of supporting student mobilization with a particular focus on short-term study abroad. And this is also a collaboration with several other offices, and I can see that the Office of Experiential Learning is here, and Student Experience, and a number of groups who are helping to support this initiative. So it's a real pleasure to have you all here and to have this project recognized and supported. And it's also a couple short things around some housekeeping. We encourage everyone to turn off their microphones when not speaking, because that will help improve the quality. Feel welcome to turn your cameras on or off, depending on your bandwidth. But when you're asking questions, we definitely would love to see your faces. So do feel welcome to turn them on when you're asking questions in the discussion period. During the session, we will have quite a few of us keeping an eye on the chat, so do feel very welcome to post questions, share resources, or share ideas yourself in there, and we can make that quite a rich resource, and then share back some of that with the participants after. We will be recording, and so please be aware that we're recording, and if you don't want your camera on, just don't turn it on, and the chat won't be captured through the recording, so feel welcome to share as much as you want in the chat. And so we hope that this will be a resource for other people and to refer back to when you're trying to look at exploring short-term student study abroad opportunities. This session has a particular focus on place and space, and so it is important to think about the land acknowledgement right now in the context of where you are right now. And we have people joining us from many places. So think of where you are right now. And think of where you're planning or hoping to travel to. The University of Windsor sits on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, which include the Ojibwa, the Ottawa, and the Potawatomi. We respect the long-standing relationships with the First Nations people in this place, where I am right now, the 100-mile Windsor-Essex Peninsula and the Straits of Detroit. A person said to me when we first started engaging in the land acknowledgements that there are a few places on Earth that someone before has not called home. And that stood with me, stayed with me. And I think that's particularly important as we start to think about study abroad opportunities. When we're thinking about going and visiting other locations, it's important to think about where we're going, find out who the original peoples are in the locations you and your students will travel to. And that might be something you consider integrating in your learning, in your course, or your land acknowledgements as you begin the process for study abroad opportunities. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the panel, who I'm hoping will turn on their cameras at least for a little bit as we do the introduction. So first, Andrew Allen. Andrew Allen is a faculty member in the Faculty of Education. He's a coordinator of the Urban Education Partnership, Teacher Education, and international work extensively in Tanzania and East Africa. So welcome, Andrew. We have Michaela Bornet, student in both science and education faculties, and she has participated now in 3 abroad opportunities, studying eco-hydrology in the rainforest, riptides on the beaches of Costa Rica, and study abroad doing forensics in Scotland. And she has been involved with Chris Hauser in writing an article on study abroad. We have Anna Galka joining us from the Office of Experiential Learning. Anna supports faculty's efforts in experiential learning, and she's been developing resources and is currently working on creating an inventory of experiential learning at the University of Windsor and has a vast set of resources and help for people. We have Chris Hauser from the Dean of Science, who began his experience in Texas A&M, leading many trips and was responsible for inspiring others to engage in these kinds of opportunities. And he has now, since he came to Windsor, done the Costa Rica tours with students in study abroad, among other things, and published on the study abroad and related topics. And it's a pleasure to welcome Shannon Murray, Faculty of Arts, who's joining us all the way from the University of Prince Edward Island. Shannon is a professor in the English department and a 3M National Teaching Fellow, and she has also been leading study abroad opportunities, and it's a real pleasure to have her join us here today. And finally, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Shalair Sinjari, who has helped organize the event and will be moderating as well. She is in the Master of Applied Science in Civil Engineering and is an Ignite student on the grant supporting study abroad. So welcome to this phenomenal panel and group of people who've dedicated this time at a really busy time for everybody. So thank you, all of you. The purpose of this workshop is really going back to that original grant that Chris submitted, is to help promote opportunities for student mobility and student mobilizations through these short-term international study abroad. And with that in mind, I'm now going to turn it over to Shalair, who is going to talk a little bit about exactly what does this mean, study abroad.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Shalair, as Dr. Kustra has said. So what is study abroad? I'm going to introduce a short definition. Study abroad or international study or work involves the immersion in a culture and or environment for a defined period and for a specific course or a course of study. It includes international education opportunities offered at the University of Windsor to study or work abroad for credit and non-credit experience. So what is the duration, the short term? A short-term study abroad programs are considered to be anything less than a traditional semester. They can vary in duration from 1 week to a summer. A faculty often lead the trips, but they can also be independent programs. They can be part of a semester-long course or a course in and of itself. While short-term programs can come in a variety of forms, they all share the same goal: provide international and cultural experience for students. Now I'm going to introduce the agenda for this workshop. First, we're going to ask our panelists, what can it look like? Then, why would you do this? Next, how do you design one? Next question will be, how do you address common challenges, which can be related to safety, recruitment of students, cost management, accessibility, and also ethnical implications. How do you assess the learning? And then in the end, we'll have time for any questions. So our first question, what can it look like? I invite Shannon to the panel.
Thank you very much. Well, I really appreciate the chance to talk about this, if for no other reason than I got to look through all my pictures and imagine what it would be like to be abroad with my students again. I've done a number of different Shakespeare field schools in the past, but the one I'm going to talk about in particular came out of an initiative of our international office, which became our study abroad office, and that's called Maymester. The principle was that we wanted opportunities for art students in particular to have some kind of international experience, get a credit at through some arts department, but make it a little bit more manageable than a full term away would be. My version was relatively modest. Others spent a month in an Irish monastery or walked the Camino, but mine started with a week in a UPEI classroom. We looked at 4 Shakespeare plays, the 4 that we knew we'd be able to see. And we did very traditional sort of seminar things there, short papers, mini lectures, and the students did their own presentations as well as the reading. Then we went to London and Stratford for 13 days. And there was a mix of walking tours, backstage tours, the plays themselves, which included not just Shakespeare, but also Hamilton, because of course we had to do that. And then there were workshops. And though almost all of this was planned and executed by me, I also worked with 5 different sites and their educational offices, which were wonderful. So at the Rose Theatre, the Globe Theatre, the Royal Shakespeare Company, and the British Library and Museum of London. So that, in brief, is what mine looked like.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Moving on to Andrew. What do you think it can look like?
Oh, yes. Good morning. I'm I also want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak and to share the work that we've been doing. We've been taking our student teachers and the faculty of education to Tanzania, East Africa since 2008. So we're calling it as an international service learning, and what it does is combines the service objectives of a professional faculty like education with learning objectives, with the intent that the activity that they engage in changes both and benefits both the recipients of the service and the provider of the service, which is our students. So this is accomplished through combining service tasks abroad with structured opportunities that link the task to self-reflection, self-discovery, and the acquisition and comprehension of values, skills, knowledge, and content. So we take our student teachers to practice teach in local schools in Tanzania. We found a small community there, and we do relief work at a center for orphan and vulnerable children after school and on the weekend. So we spend about 2 weeks, do tutoring and help out with homework, but we also take care of the basic needs of the kids. So we provide food and nutrition, we provide health services, take them to the hospital, that type of thing. We help to rebuild the center. So that's kind of what we've been doing since 2008. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew.
You're welcome.
Chris, we would like to hear your impact on what can it look like?
Thank you. As introduced, I'm Chris Hauser. I'm the Dean of Science, and what I'm going to do is kind of provide an overview as to some of our study abroad programs that I've run over my career. I do apologize for the quality of the slides. We had some conversion issues from PC to Mac, sort of Mac to PC to widescreen to Teams, so it's a little jumbled, but I think you get the idea. I have been doing study abroad since 2007. I've done them primarily in Belize, Costa Rica, and Mexico when I was at Texas A&M. Now we're doing them at Costa Rica, Jamaica, and if it hadn't been for COVID, we were planning to move into Colombia. We've moved I've had taken more than 750 students abroad with bonus publications in the science of teaching and learning, and with respect to working in the field. That led to more than $3 million in research funding, number of international partnerships, and again, this ability to integrate teaching and research. Really, when it comes down to what this can look like, my trips are in the field, in the jungle, from the volcanoes, on the edge of a volcano where it was erupting behind us, to working directly in the jungle at a student center where every day we would walk out from our cabins out into the jungle and deal with pit vipers and anything else that you might find there, where students are actually in the jungle and we have machetes. It's a safety hazard, a safety reason for having them, but it does represent a hazard that we can talk about at a later point. And not only have we done that at A&M, we brought that to Windsor, and we've done a number of trips so far. Most of them are in the jungle, hands-on, dealing with the snakes, the bugs, the monkeys, or what I really like is the trips that involve beaches, understanding rip currents, and beach erosion in Central America. Again, very hands-on, very much playing in the dirt and getting your hands dirty.
Thank you so much. Very interesting to hear how the students were going on the study abroad. Moving on to our next question. Why would you do this, and what are the benefits behind it? Michaela, would you like to give this student perspective?
Yeah, so one of the things that first drew me to study abroad was the opportunity to travel, but there were also so many academic and personal benefits associated with my study abroad experience. So one of the main benefits of study abroad is you have hands-on learning. So you're fully immersed and you truly experience the content. So it's one thing to learn about radiation balance in the rainforest, but it's so much more impactful when you're physically taking the measurements, when you're able to see those areas with your own eyes, and you're able to use your own data to determine the final answer. So to further reinforce the importance of experiential learning and hands-on learning, reflecting back on my experience, if I had read how to calculate discharge or riptide formation from a book, I wouldn't have had the same impression and I wouldn't have retained the same level of knowledge that I feel that I have. The next benefit is building networks and connections. So I built those relationships and connections with my professors on the study abroad. And consequently, I wasn't nervous to ask questions in class to my future professors, to go to their office hours, so it had a positive impact on my learning. From a professor's perspective, you build networks and connections with other professors at different universities, whether that be to collaborate or share resources. As of right now, I have connections with professors at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland, and that opens doors in terms of collaboration and future schooling opportunities. I also met a lot of other students, and they have become part of my network of friends. And that translates into the classroom. So now I have people to study with and to talk with and for emotional support. So in science, where you have these large classrooms, it isn't always easy to make friends. And as a result of study abroad, you're in this close group and you're there for a period of time and you're engaging with those people and you create long-lasting friendships. And that also reflects back onto the institution. You also learn more about the culture. So in Scotland, I got to learn about the traditional dances in Scotland. I got to play the bagpipes. So if anyone's looking to take up a new instrument, they're a lot harder than it looks. And I learned more about the culture, their land, and their history. So therefore, participating in study abroad also led to future research opportunities. So in terms of collaborating on a manuscript and doing field research in Costa Rica. So it opened a lot of different doors. In terms of personal growth, I feel like I matured and I had the chance to step out of my comfort zone. So having lived at home during my studies, this gave me the chance to get the experience of living away from home and having that independence. And I feel like if I hadn't participated in those study abroads before, I wouldn't have been willing to do field research or go on future study abroads. One of the things that I got to do was community service learning. And what it reinforced for me is the importance of being able to translate scientific content into everyday language. So this is such an important skill to have, and specifically in Costa Rica, being able to teach the local children about water conservation was super impactful for them, but also for me. And I was able to translate that skill into future papers and projects in my classes. So I love the study abroad so much because I found learning came to life, and I got to learn about new things and experience new things. And that reinforced what I was learning, and that spurred me to do more. As I'm wrapping up my undergrad and reflecting on things that had a significant impact on my learning and growth, in the last 4 years, study abroad would be near the top of my list. So just to move on to the next slide. So these are just a couple examples of photos. So here is when I was speaking with the local children in the communities, also in the lab for forensics in Scotland. This is me doing some traditional dance, and then again in the rainforest in Costa Rica.
That sounds very fun. Thank you so much, Michaela. The next speaker, Andrew.
Yes, thank you. Michel Foucault says that we know what we do and why we do it, but he says we don't know what our doing does. And so our aim is to develop our students' critical social consciousness and increase their global cultural competence and awareness. And we believe that taking our teacher candidates, our student teachers abroad, to actually teach on the ground in local schools and to try to help to meet the basic needs of children, make them better teachers as in their custodial roles as extended parents. And when they return to Canada, they're teaching in these increasingly diverse classrooms, because we get asked all the time, why would you go halfway across the world? When our teachers come back, we believe that they're better teachers because they develop empathy. For example, for a lot of our students, being in an environment where they're not the majority for the first time, learning how to communicate when you only know 10 words in a language. So when they go into classrooms and they're dealing with English language learners, they make greater connections. And so we are kind of confident that we've seen it over the years where our students come back more textured, more globally aware, and we help to dispel a lot of the myths too about the continent. I know students go in with their preconceptions. They seem to know more about the continent than we do when they're going for the first time based on their media perceptions. But after landing on the ground and working with people, working on the ground, and also communicating with folks who see the world quite differently from they do. So we feel that there are so much benefits, and I often tell folks, get a passport, go see the world. And so that's what we try to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Moving on to Shannon. Why would you do this? What are your opinions on it?
Well, I really think in terms of three different reasons. The first one I'll mention is purely selfish. It is that this is the best, the richest, certainly the most difficult, but also the most fun teaching experience of my life. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. The moment the restrictions are raised, I'm there. In fact, just looking at these pictures, I can't imagine how much we crammed into what was essentially 10 days away, given our travel time and our free time as well. So part of it is just, it's selfish. I love this experience. Part of it is that larger thing that we expect of our students when they have international experiences. And I think about my own example. So I got to study abroad for a term in Germany. And when I think back to my undergraduate education, that's what I really remember. I mean, those 4 years, and really it was those 3 months that loom largest. They were, in fact, transformational for me. And that's what we hope for in a lot of our courses. It's a lot easier to do when you have this kind of international experience. And I also think about a student who came with me the very first time I tried this in the 90s, a student, Joanne, who was very nervous about being anywhere outside the Maritimes at all. She was scared for her first time in London, and she didn't smile. By the end, she was smiling all the time. And now I follow her on Facebook, and she's a teacher who has taught in Asia. She's taught in Peru. She's been to Iceland and Japan. And so following her on Facebook, I get the sense that that was the spark, right? That was the opening, the opportunity for her to realize that the world could be hers. When I think about it from a disciplinary point of view, because I teach Shakespeare, I spend a lot of my time in the classroom explaining to students that although, yes, you could set Hamlet on the moon, you could set Hamlet in Wall Street in the 20th century, but it has a special resonance in a theater, and it has an extra special resonance in the Globe Theater for which it was first written. I can say that, but after a while, it's like explaining a joke, right? You tell them how it would feel to be in that experience. And this allowed me to actually those are my students there, arrayed around the front of the stage in the Globe Theatre in London. They got that experience. They got to do a workshop in the Globe Theatre. They got to see 2 performances. So rather than merely being able to say to them, in sort of the way that Michaela was, to lecture about it, to talk to them about it, I was able to give them that experience. And so it's the selfish, it's the larger thing that we, I think, want all our students to experience. But it's also, from my point of view, disciplinary. Many of my students will never have had the chance, certainly to see this kind of theater, but actually to go to good performances in their lives, beyond, I should say, Anne of Green Gables. Not that there's anything wrong with Anne of Green Gables. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Shannon. It is very understandable to see different perspectives from a different country. The experience is very different. I truly agree with you. Moving on to Chris, we would like to hear your personal and professional benefits.
Yeah, since Michaela largely described what happens in my study abroad, I thought I would give the perspective from that of a faculty member and why you would want to do the thinking towards tenure promotion and research. Every study abroad that I do, whether it be in the jungle or on the beach, is directly tied to my own research. And it's in those study abroads that we are collecting data that eventually does become the proof of concept for other studies. And in fact, it's how we started to build a better understanding of beach safety issues within Costa Rica, within Latin America in general, and eventually built a very strong partnership with the Red Cross in Costa Rica that ultimately led this year, June 2020, to the establishment of a new law in the country to have lifeguards posted at every beach and to have an entire life-saving swimming program within the country. That wouldn't have happened, and I wouldn't have been part of that if it hadn't been for the study abroad. And again, the data that we collected led to that. I'm also going to give you, though, a slight variation on this, which is the personal side to it. What I just described is the professional, how it benefits your research. The other part is the personal side. That's the selfish part that Shannon was talking about. I go on these because they're fun. They're what I want to do. I'm always learning something new. And it was a focus of a University Affairs article I wrote the other year on about why you would do these. And I'm going to focus on one that I did in Belize many years ago. We had to be evacuated from that island, but we were there and we were on this little island for several weeks, and we were mapping that island. The students got hands-on experiences on mapping techniques and why the shorelines were eroding in the coastal zone. And in fact, we got a publication, a well-cited publication, looking at how the keys of the Mesoamerican reef were responding to sea level rise and storms. But again, a hurricane hit, and so we had to be evacuated by the Belizean Navy, which was about going these 15-foot vessels across hurricane waves, just pounding as you head back towards the shoreline. We get back to shore, and the students are happy because they finally have Wi-Fi after a couple of weeks and they can do their laundry. I was bored out of my mind, so I picked up a bike and I started going around town, and I eventually found Gomye, who ran a vegetarian, vegan, and seafood restaurant. And I love to cook. So I became his sous chef for the next couple of days during that study abroad. The students were doing assignments. I became a sous chef, and I learned how to make callaloo, how to make snapper and coconut milk. It was an amazing experience for me personally. So at the same time you think about these professionally for the students, also make sure that you're also gaining something personal as well.
Thanks, Chris. So now we move on to a question that is important to the instructor's side. As you've heard the benefits, you think you want to try it. Okay, so what do you do now? How do you design one of these things? And for that, I'm going to turn it over first to Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I'm here smiling because I've got so many of those little stories where things don't go as planned, but they turn out to be the most amazing experience and things that you remember. So we were very, very lucky in setting this up. And because our students are teachers, are learning to be teachers, we had to assign them to work in schools. And because we also want them to work with community service organizations in Tanzania, we wanted to find a space that worked with children. So what we had to do, first of all, is to establish an effective community partnership with any of those organizations on the ground, and that is key. And the best way to do that is through communication. We also had to develop relationships with the local government officials, with local schools, with the school boards, with the principals, with teachers, and with folks within the community who were already doing work in those places. So luckily, again, for us, we had a colleague at the Faculty of Education at the University of Dar es Salaam, which is a major capital in Tanzania, who had studied in Canada at OAZ, U of T, and they were able to introduce us to folks at their university at the University of Dar es Salaam, as well as some of the grassroots community organizations from her community. And we did an exploratory trip. We created relationships, traveled and met as many people as possible, again, within the government, within the school board. And once we land on the ground with students, we get our students to do a needs assessment, work with those community organizations, to work with teachers and work with kids and in helping to set up and develop this. And so that's that's how we end up with our program. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. And now I'm going to share it with Anna, who has a number of resources she can help share.
So in starting any course design, you want to start with your desired learning outcomes for students. So what do you want them to learn? Also consider your research interests and see if you can build around these two items. As Chris mentioned, you can create research opportunities from what students do, and eventually they could even participate in that research. So those are two things to really look at when you're trying to design. And as Andrew said, you do want to build those community relationships. That's definitely the things you want to do. So you need to start early. Give yourself lots of time. All new adventures need planning time up front. Use others' experiences to point you in the right direction. Don't reinvent the wheel. Those that have done it before you have a wealth of knowledge, as you can tell with this panel, on our campus and on other campuses. So when you're thinking about taking that step, reach out to us in the Experiential Learning Office. Email me as a place to start. There are also resources on the Office of Experiential Learning website for developing any new EL activity. And do remember, when you do in your course design, it should include a required reflection. I do realize that a lot of EL is missing that, so that is a point that I do want to stress, to make sure you include that time for students to think about what it is that they have participated in and what they've learned and how that is going to change their lives, because you know it will. One thing I would like to add is see if you can work to make it an EL experience that can count towards the SMA 3 metrics. So the requirements that the ministry is looking for to ensure that we get our funding. So it could be, so study abroad in itself does not qualify towards the SMA 3 metric, nor does international field trips. But fieldwork and community service learning, whether it's local or international, do. So that could be the difference between, say, an archaeological course where the students visit ruins and excavation sites, which would be a field trip, even though it's an international, very high impact. It doesn't count towards SMA 3. And participating in an archaeological dig would be considered field work and would count. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're developing those courses.
Thanks, Anna. So now you've started designing it. You've reached out to Anna as an critical point to gather resources and find out information. So then you start to hear about common issues or run into them. Here's a set that we know are likely to be common issues for people beginning. And one of the hot ones is, how do you find out the safety protocols and maintain safety for your students? And for this one, I'm going to turn it back to Anna.
Safety and risk management can be its own workshop. There's much to be said about it. There's lots of little permutations, but there are a few key things to remember. Planning is the main tool that you have to ensure a safe and successful experience. As with any new experience, give yourself time to think through all the permutations and plan for the worst to ensure that you have the best possible experience. On our Office of EL website, we have a risk management guide. So I'll stick a link to that in the chat. Take some time to think about the hazards you already know that are specific to your location and type of activity that you're thinking of. Then use the guide to get you thinking about all the other things that you should consider. The guide is presented in easy checklists and where to find some help. It's not specific to international courses, but there's a lot there to help you get going. And we'll be adding specific international considerations to the website as we go along. The guide mentions waivers. So this is something you will need your students to sign. They're usually fairly basic. The university legal department has templates, and you will need to contact them. They will ask you for information about the trip, and the waiver will be customized to your course. It's not onerous, it just needs planning time. Student liability insurance. Our university insurance covers students' liability during the class or academic portion of the trip. So not when they're out at the bar drinking afterwards, just that academic portion. So those things are covered for course-based trips. Students need appropriate health insurance before they depart. And the university doesn't have a health insurance provider for student health insurance, although we do have experience with different providers. So that is a conversation you'll need to have with either me or someone in your department that already has recommended a provider to students. There are a lot of components to what is appropriate health insurance. So be sure to have that conversation, and we're very willing to help. When we do begin to travel again after COVID, there will likely be COVID-related protocols that we probably don't even know at this point, and those will need to be included in your waiver, and legal will ensure that those are included. And I'm mentioning legal. Who is this mysterious legal? Julie Laforette in legal. She's the Insurance Risk Management and FIPA officer. She's a wonderful help. She has those templates, and she can help you with those waivers and any questions you have about liability insurance. A great resource. Another key thing to remember is to ensure your students are prepared. And for your students to be prepared, you need to be prepared and then communicate. I can't say that enough. Communicate. Have procedures in place, ensure they are well communicated, and follow them. So if the protocol is no one is ever alone, minimum of 2 people together at all times, make that clear. When you're designing the activities, make sure it's easy to comply with that, and then reinforce it. So if you see someone wandering off on their own, you bring them back and you reinforce the protocol so that everyone knows this is serious. Have a plan what to do in case of emergencies, be it medical or otherwise, and make sure students know what to do in case of any kind of emergencies. And for students to be prepared, a pre-training or orientation is a must. We have a wonderful resource in Michelle Fitzgerald, who coordinates the exchange program. She offers day-long orientations, usually offered twice a year, that your students can attend. Or if you've designed your own pre-departure training and orientation, she has made the offer to come into your orientation and present her material that is relevant to your course. She covers a great deal about safety, risk, security, travel preparations, etc. It's really worthwhile. And it brings those safety issues really to the forefront for the students. Orientation also needs to cover cultural norms of the location, basics of day-to-day living, ensuring students have correct visa and documentations depending on where they are heading and what they're doing. And consider, do they need working knowledge of another language to where they're going? And they'll need time to prepare for that. And there are other points mentioned in that risk management guide for your preparation and communication. I could go on, but I won't. Always keep in mind that the role of the faculty member is supervision and student safety to provide a reasonable standard of care and safety. So work that into your plan. And when planning, ask for help, because we do have a lot of resources to help you.
Thank you so much, Anna. We popped a few links in, but a few more will come. And now I invite Andrew.
Yes, thank you. I concur. Safety is paramount, and 24 hours a day for the 3 or 4 weeks we're in Tanzania, that's what keeps me up at night. That's what I worry about the most. Tanzania is an extremely safe country. However, our students are often inexperienced travelers. I've taken students who've never traveled outside of Windsor, Essex before, never had a passport. And they often want to go off and explore on their own. So similarly, I say to them, your car is safe in the university parking lot. However, if you leave your laptop on the front seat, then you're inviting temptation. So for example, our students will often take out large sums of cash in the marketplace. And they don't realize that we have marked bodies. So I could see my students from miles away coming back from the market. I just need to go to the end of the road and I look and I can see them. And so they're not used to that kind of international travel. So what we do, I agree, the idea of an orientation, getting them ready for the trip. We have a strict schedule, letting them know before the trip that it's a working trip, that it's not a pleasure trip, keeping students busy at all times. The groups are assigned different tasks on the ground. We meet for dinner, have a meeting every night to review the activities of the day and to plan for the following day. There's a strict curfew in the evenings. We stay together as a large group at all times. And when we provide opportunities for them to go off to the market, even in smaller groups or 2 or 3, we send them with a local driver that we know and a local translator that we know. So that's some of the things that we do. Thank you.
Thanks. And Chris.
So I will make very clear that the entire reason for the university having waivers is because of me. That they didn't actually have waivers when I first arrived at Windsor, and they had to start writing them. And the reason is that my trips tend to push a little bit of some of the health and safety limits. We are in the jungle. We do have snakes to worry about. The students are allowed to carry machetes and to use machetes, which has freaked out many legal departments. But in fact, it's a safety reason. You take a machete because if you ever get bit by a snake, you need to kill that snake immediately because you need to figure out what it was. Was it an anticoagulant or a coagulant type snake in terms of its venom? So in fact, we go through all the safety checks. We go through how to behave in the jungle, what to do, what not to do, and there are very clear limits. The other is that on some of the beach trips, we actually will get into rip currents. That's what we're studying. Now, we have life jackets. There are, in fact, lifeguards on the beach. We also have surfers in the water. It's completely safe, but we do get into them. It's part of being in that moment. In fact, I've got a publication out there called Riding the Rip. If you want to hear from students about their experiences being in this somewhat dangerous setting. But I'll note by doing this is that never go swimming yourself. So one of the things that Michaela has been on the Costa Rica trip, whenever we went to the waterfall where there's a rope swing in a cliff that people are allowed to have fun on, I love that spot. But when there are students there, I will never, ever go swimming. And the reason is because if there's another student who can't swim, is uncomfortable, if they see me going in, that adds to the peer pressure of them having to go in. And one of the pictures I showed you before of a big, wide, expansive beach, one of the reasons I showed you that is because I've been an expert witness on students drowning on study abroad trips by American universities. You have to understand what students are going to do, how they're going to behave, not only just on the beach, but going back to what Andrew had mentioned about them sneaking out or going out on their own. Students will try to sneak out. You have to think about what they're going to do, understand your location, and what could potentially go wrong. That's not to scare them. That's not to try to control everything. But if you understand the risks, you effectively communicate it, you talk about it, then you're going to minimize it, including on their own non-academic time when they're allowed to go out. Many will go have a drink. Well, I wouldn't believe how many times I've had to teach people how you never leave a drink on a table and walk away. Those little life skills that we take for granted. As Andrew says, a lot of people they've not traveled before. You have to teach them how to travel and how to be in those difficult settings, to understand that there is going to be drugs, there's going to be alcohol in the street, there's going to be prostitutes on the street, how to understand that city setting, understand that environment. And if you can do that, then you've minimized that risk component.
Thank you so much, Chris. Now moving on to our next question. How do you recruit and choose the students? I invite Shannon.
Thank you. What I did was to put up posters and to tell people about what was happening on social media. And very quickly, the course filled. Now, I was lucky because our international office took the applications themselves. And so that next step of acceptance or not went through them first. So by the time the applications came to me, it was a nice, neat group of 12, and I didn't have to do any winnowing. They were all already appropriate and properly briefed. They'd already gone through a course, for example, on Moodle that prepared them for it. The one thing I'll say here is that I started talking about this the spring before, and we started the advertising in September for all 4 of the main master courses. So really we had our students chosen selected by October. And that was really important to me because part of what I wanted to do was to make them partners in some of the design, in some of the planning for the course. So we started working together, but by the time they were all together, probably the end of October, and then we met monthly after that. So that was our recruitment process. Largely, the heavy lifting was largely handled by our international office. And Andrew.
So our Tanzania trip and our other programs abroad, we take students to China, to Scotland, and we have other service and to Jamaica, and we have other service learning opportunities. They've become well known because we've been doing this in 2008, and word of mouth is one of our best advertising that we have. Students have reported to us that sometimes it's the number one reason for choosing to come to the University of Windsor and coming to our faculty. So what we do a presentation at faculty orientation, and I just did one this week, and we follow that up with an information session. And in September, there is an application process. We invite new students to apply with a letter of intent, and they have to talk about what they have to offer, and based on their experiences, and to show us in writing instead of just telling us what you did. Demonstrate to show us some of the things and how what you hope to gain from the project, from being involved. We do an interview of all the applicants, and then there's a selection with a group of faculty and alumni who've gone on the trip before. The alumni group is crucial. They're the ones who keep the ball going. They're the ones who do that transition. They're the ones who help with all the interviewing, would help with the promotion and the fundraising and all that. So yeah, there's an application process that includes a letter of intent, an interview process, and then a selection by faculty and alumni who've gone on the trip. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Andrew. Now we're going to move on to financial support. The question is, how do you keep costs manageable? And I invite Andrew to.
So, because all our fundraising activities are focused on the children and working with the children in Tanzania, we spend every penny on the ground that we raise. So because also we're collecting money under a charitable number, our students have to finance the trips themselves. Our faculty has and continue to subsidize a part of the cost for students. And we've seen students come up with creative ways to receive support from family and friends. What I often do, I have to say to students every year, because I get this, oh, I can't go, I can't afford it. I say, if you really want to go in September, we're going in May. If you really want to go, then we can look at possibilities. And there are ways in which to do that kind of their own personal fundraising in their family and their friends. So in short, we do subsidize the trip for our students, but most of the cost comes from their own pockets. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Moving on to Shannon.
And the same is true for us. Now, one of the things that we do have going for us is a very generous donation, the Florence Simmons bursary, which allows every student at UPEI to have a $1,000 bursary for international travel once during their undergraduate education. So my goal was to make my 2 weeks abroad around $2,500, so that with that $1,000, it would be $1,500, including the airfare. In order to do that, I did pay my own way and my own accommodation, and I know that that's not probably sustainable. I was happy to do it, but it's going to be a different kind of ask for people who are more junior than I am. So it's probably not an ideal situation, but that did help. And because I booked everything early, I got good rates, and I also, both for cash and also for the challenges that students have with their eating choices. We didn't do anything with food, so they paid for their own food. So that kept things around $1,500 for everything included in the travel. And we still keep looking for alternatives for fundraising and so on, but that's what it ended up with last year in the Maymester.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And Anna?
One of the things in talking to some of the professors to make it the cost manageable is allowing students to book their own flights, maybe on points or whatever arrangements they have. So you can start with the course or the activity beginning at the location airport on a certain date and time, and then they can plan around it however best they can. I know science provides a $1,000 scholarship towards students' participation in a study abroad, and Erica just posted in the chat the link to the Student Life Enhancement Fund. I would love to see if there's bursaries. The public search function is not available this year to look into the bursaries. So students would have to go and research those themselves to see if there's something that would apply for them. I know that, for instance, like the alternative spring break and others types of courses have done student fundraising if they're not already using it for on the ground. So, you know, they've done movie nights, auctions, Valentine gift sales, greeting cards, lunch delivery system, anything that they could find a way to raise some funds to help them out. And usually if they do it as a group, it's already pre-bonding them before the trip. So that helps as well. I'd like to suggest that keep us informed, the Office of Experiential Learning. So as soon as we learn about grant opportunities that might possibly fit into what you're interested in doing, that we can share them with you. I know a lot of these are really fast turnaround, last minute, so everything would already need to be pretty much in place. But if there is something that would fit, then we could share that if we know about it. And hopefully we'll gather some more of these. And as we learn more, I'll put them on our website and have a compiled list for you.
Thank you so much. Chris?
Yeah, following for what Anna mentioned, so the trip to Costa Rica is $2,500 plus tuition for 2 courses. What we do is Science has been providing anybody who goes on that trip $1,000 scholarship towards the cost of that course, regardless of their home major, as well as we then allow them to book their flights on their own, because some students will want to take a red-eye, some will use air miles, etc. And the other is that we say that the study abroad starts and ends at the host airport. So it starts in San Jose, which means that they can arrive early and go on a bit of a vacation, or they can stay in the country on their own personal time and continue. So having students book their own flights has actually proved to be one of the most flexible and cost-saving approaches. And we've had some students who have, instead of $1,000 flight, which is what I conservatively estimate, they've been able to get it for $200 to $300. So it's an $800 savings to them by taking this approach.
Thank you so much, Chris. Now moving on to accessibility. How do you address accessibility? And I invite Shannon.
Which is such a great question to ask. In fact, the last meeting of at Study Abroad here at UPEI, that was the whole of our concern, just to make sure that the next time we do this, we have it open to as many students as possible, and we want to make it both financially accessible and physically accessible for all of our students. I guess the best way to put it for the last Maymester was that we had 4 courses that were on offer, and for one of them it was going to be no problem whatsoever, no matter what kind of accessibility needs they had. For one, it was going to be really difficult, and that was the walking the Camino. But for the other 2, we made sure that we had we were flexible enough at the beginning in the design so that we could accommodate what students we got. So again, that goes back to the idea of having your students early and planning around them. Now, that said, you still have to be flexible even at the last minute. So part of mine involved my students being groundling, so standing for 3 hours twice to watch their Shakespeare plays at the Globe Theatre. And that was going to be fine with them, as was all of the walking that I had planned. And then one of my students got a concussion a few weeks before the trip. Once we knew that she was going to be safe to go, a lot of things had to be very quickly arranged around her her concussion. So a seat was found for her at the Globe, and alternate ways of getting around were possible. So planning far ahead of time, knowing the students that you're going to have, being flexible when you can, but also preparing for the things that you didn't plan for. All of those things are important. But as I said at the beginning, this is still something that we're struggling with, because we want this to be possible for every single one of our students.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Chris?
Accessibility is one of the most difficult parts to the couple of study abroads that I've described to this point. As you've seen, it's very physical and in the field. And again, it is, as Shannon mentioned, something that we do struggle with. We want to make sure that this is available to as many people as possible. But some of the terrain that we do, some of the things that we do is just not available. However, at the field station that I helped set up in Costa Rica, we made sure to put in wheelchair sidewalks. And we started to think about accessibility from a different perspective, not on each individual study abroad, but making sure that we then provided the space on that field station campus to at least allow for the accessibility for somebody in a wheelchair to actually be allowed to get into the jungle and do the night tour and to see the frogs and the snakes. But again, it's something that's very difficult, and I've never been able to fully figure out how to do it appropriately in the environments that I work in.
Thank you so much, Chris. Moving on to the next question. What are possible ethical implications? And for this, I invite Andrew.
Yes, so because we're doing relief work, we're leaving from the West and we're going into a developing country like Tanzania, then we acknowledge that attempting to do any kind of relief work on the continent of Africa by bringing Canadian student teachers opens us up to critique for reinscribing the dominance of the West and the white savior coming to save people on the dark continent. And so we've been challenged and we've been asked that question by colleagues. When I present at conferences, it's one of the first questions that come up about some of the negative impact of doing this kind of international service learning, where the kids become enamored with the kids on the ground becomes enamored with our students. Sorry, we bring technology there that they haven't seen yet, in particularly going into a space for orphan involvement with children. Robin Crabtree, who's one of the leading authors of writing about international service learning, she says that we need to look at the tangible manifestations of the material and spiritual impact that we've had on Tanzania. So for example, after going into teaching at the schools, the principals will say to us that the attendance have gone up dramatically whenever we show up and stay there for a while. And so that we're having that impact on kids. We continue to get messages from students who thank us for the tutoring and for the help with our homework, and they update us. We're connected with them on Facebook and what they're doing right now educationally. So you can't put a price tag on that. When we land on the ground and we go to the Center for Orphan and Involvement with Children, the kids will run back into their rooms and come back out with their report cards to try to show us what they've been doing. So we've improved the living conditions. We've also inspired others. The purpose of us going to Tanzania is to get rid of ourselves and for they themselves to take up the work. So one year we asked one of the kids at the center, what do you want to be when you grow up? And he looked at me and he says, I want to be like you, Baba. I want to come back and I want to help orphan children. So we recognize that we have this colonial legacy of dependency of foreign aid. And one of the ways of getting around that is to partner with grassroots organizations. And again, to eventually get rid of ourselves and at some point having the locals take over from us. And when we're on the ground, we hire local contractors and we purchase local items. In the first few years when we were going, we were buying stuff here and taking to Tanzania, and we realized that puts businesses, put people out of business in Tanzania. So we go there and we spend the money on the ground and we hire local contractors and purchase local supplies. And again, working with grassroots organization with the aim of replacing ourselves and getting rid of ourselves. So in 10 years from now, we shouldn't be doing the same work in the same area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Those are really difficult issues to be dealing with and some very helpful practical strategies. And so now we're moving on to a question which also relates to the teaching side, which is, now you've organized this wonderful event and you've gone, how do you assess the learning? And for that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Andrew.
What we do with our students, we start assessing them from the moment they signed up. And again, they have to write about what they have to offer and what they intend to gain from the program. We do a lot of reflections throughout the entire process. So we look at their commitment to doing the preparation work here in Windsor. There's a lot of fundraising activities and a lot of preparation to get ready to go. And we look at their involvement again throughout the year. And students are asked to keep a reflection journal from day one. It's often a gift that we give them on the first day. And once we're in Tanzania, we look at the commitment to work on the ground. We do the same kinds of practicum evaluation and assessment that we would do here. So when they go in to teach, we look at the curriculum content, we look at their pedagogy, we look at their relationship with kids and so on. And we, again, they're working at a center for orphan and vulnerable children. And when we work at the center in the evenings and on the weekends, we divide them into groups of food and nutrition. So they have to go out to the market, make sure they're providing a balanced meal. We look at students who are helping to rebuild the center. So we put wire mesh and wire screening on the windows. We replace mattresses that need to be replaced. And we hire folks to come in to help to do some of the work. So we've built a water tower. We've dug a septic tank. We dug a well. And then we have a team responsible for education. So they're the ones responsible for the tutoring and the schoolwork that happens during in the evenings and on the weekend. And then we have a health and well-being team that will take the kids to the hospital, make sure they all get a checkup, and to deal with minor cuts and bruises and anything that happens. Once they get back to Windsor, we do a reflection afterwards. So we do and we've done research on this, the pre, during, and post trip. And we look at their own reflection and their own growth and their movement in their thinking. And that becomes the major part of our assessment of what they're learning. Thank you.
Thank you. And Shannon.
Yeah, so because we had a week together before we left, that's when they did short papers. They had 4 plays to read, but wrote 2-page short papers and presented them in our classes before we left. And after we came back, and I gave them about 3 or 4 weeks to get this in because some of them were going on to other travel afterwards, they had a full portfolio with a selection of materials and artifacts from the experience that started with that thing that Anna mentioned before, which is that critical reflective piece, which is so important, that sort of tied everything together. For me, the thing that was most extraordinary, though, was their work on the reflective journal, on the field journal. And Andrew, I'm going to steal your idea of giving it to them as a gift beforehand. That's so lovely and ritualistic. I love. I'm going to use that one. I gave them just 3 prompts and told them that before they went to bed or first thing in the morning, so they didn't forget, they should write down what they did that day, what they learned, and then what do they think. So that's the reflective part of it. What surprised them? What did they think was extraordinary? What did they learn about themselves because of that experience? But rather than doing that, I found that they use them all the time. They carried them with them. And the 2 pictures I have here are of Myri, who got right off the ship, the Golden Hind, and immediately went right to her journal. And that's Rose, who is sort of sitting at the grave of William Shakespeare and recording her thoughts immediately. So they did so much more with that field journal, that reflective journal, than I expected, that we had already negotiated the grading weighting before we left. But at the end of our experience away, we determined that we were going to make that reflective journal a larger part of, excuse me, of their final grade, because they did such extraordinary work on it. So that was our assessment.
Thank you. And I'm just posting a link to some resources on reflection that were developed by Alison Skeen, Anna Galka, Jessica Raful, and a few others. So if there are some extra things that would be helpful to you in getting reflection, we'll pop that in. And Shannon, you gave me a journal. I don't know if you remember it, but clearly I think this is something that will sit well. So that's fantastic. So thank you, everyone. We've now progressed through the ideas from what does it look like, why would you want to do it, how would you design it, how do you deal with some of the large challenges that people face in looking at study abroad opportunities, and then how do you assess all of this as a teacher, because often it's designed as part of a course or as the whole course. And so thank you so much to the panelists for really rich both stories and practical tips and lessons learned. And now we'd like to open it up to the audience to ask questions or share some of the resources and ideas that they've had from their experience. So I'm now going to move the slide over slightly and invite everyone to share any questions that you might have. Pop them in the chat, or feel welcome now to take your microphone and your camera and join us in conversation. And I see a hand raised.
Hi, Erica, it's Judy.
Hey, Judy.
I think it's I guess part question, part comment. So I thought it was interesting to hear both Michaela and Shannon talking about, you know, Shannon saying that she remembers her study abroad years later as having such an impact, and Michaela making the comment when she reflects back on her 4 years about what an impact that would have. So my question is more about, you know, that connection with alumni that have done these. And Shannon, I'm not sure if you've had them in the past, but I know, Chris, you said at other institutions you've had them. Is there any connection with alumni later on to see about them being donors or supporting these initiatives? Because I think as you're talking about the impact it had and trying to do fundraising, that may be a way that we can link it, because it is so impactful.
So I can first speak to that one, and I know others mentioned about having direct alumni who were part of a previous study abroad. I've also brought it where alumni who had never done a study abroad themselves got to come with the students, got to see part of that experience. And it was at that moment when they see a student in the jungle for the very first time that they say, hey, I'd like to own that experience in the future for future students. And that's when we seen fund. I did that with some executives from oil companies in Austin. And I remember picking them up at the airport, and their arms were crossed, like, why am I going to the jungles of Costa Rica? $150,000 donation check later, they understood what that was. And because they saw what the students were seeing for the first time. So I completely agree. This is a major advancement opportunity.
Is this maybe something that the advancement offices might be connected with? Has anyone already built a connection with the advancement offices?
So we did, and just before COVID hit, we had actually started to promote an alumni abroad program through Science called Fire and Ice, and it was based upon going to Iceland. And you would then go with some of our geologists, and you would learn about the geology of Iceland, and or going to Costa Rica with Dan Mennel and learning about the birds and doing that birding. We had started to build that. COVID has put that on the back burner. The aim was that they would pay for their way down to the trip, but there would be a premium of about $1,500 to $2,000 on top of that. They would be contributing to a scholarship for a future student.
Wow, great idea. Thank you.
Thanks. And I see, Kevin, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks everybody for the presentation. I learned a lot in there, and I came in a little bit late, so this might have been said, but do you find that there's a student number that is a good number of students to take? You know, it's because when you do open these things, I know everybody said they book up really fast, right? And so, yeah, basically looking at numbers.
Can I jump in there just to say, but for me, and I've read this before and had experiences elsewhere, 10 to 1 is probably good. So 10 students to one other person. Now the last one that I did, I was the only professor on the trip, and that's not ideal. So certainly next time I'm hoping for 20 students and 2 people who would be the leaders. But yeah, 10 to 1 for me. How about the rest of you?
I've done up to 20 to 1, but it's been in that environment where I'm very comfortable. Ultimately, the number that go on a trip with me is defined by the size of the bus that I can get. And that becomes the ultimate defining point. But I find that under 10 becomes a bit of an issue when it comes to how the students are working and the activities that I built. I like that 10 to 15 range in the way that the dynamics work.
And I'll just mention that it helps to check in with, if you're working with other educational offices, as I did, because they sometimes have their own rules. So the Globe and the RSC both had 10 to 1 rules, which I stretched a little to get my 12 in there, but because they were adults, and you know, I could count one of them who was 29 as sort of my second older person.
So yeah, so just quickly for us, I found too that 10 was an ideal number, but not necessarily the student to professor ratio or supervisor. That our most productive team was a group of 8, and we've taken as much as 28. And once it gets above 15, 20, it becomes unwieldy. You're managing several bodies, even if there are 2 of us, because we can't be everywhere. And I agree, it depends on the size of the bus that we can get. So sometimes we've had 3 or 4 vehicles just because we just don't have enough. But an ideal number for me is between 10 and 15. And I feel that on those trips too, that I like the security of having another colleague with me to bounce ideas off of, to carry some of the burden of that stress, because you're on 24 hours a day when you're there, concerned about students. We've had peanut allergies. We've had to take students to hospital we've had sunstrokes. So different things come up. So it helps if there's one person still in the school or still in the field supervising, and the other person can run off to the hospital. I've been on one trip by myself, and it was quite stressful just to be alone and just thinking, I'm halfway across the world. It will take 2 days for anybody to get to us, because once you land on the ground, it's another 8 hours of travel. And so ideal number is around 10 to 15.
So I will also say that one of the ways that I found effective, having done so many of them, I've always made an offer to all faculty who have never done a study abroad to join me on the 2 weeks. That allows them for the training of how to do something like this, but it also gives me that extra person who I can lean on during that emergency. And I've actually found it surprising at A&M, every trip had 1 or 2 other faculty members who would join me. At Windsor, not one faculty member has ever said, hey, I would like an all expenses paid trip to Costa Rica. So I'm putting that out there to anybody who's in the list. And Judy already put her hand up.
Take me.
Obviously you didn't see my application.
And I see Xijing. I saw your post there. Did you want to share a little bit of information?
Okay, I've been working with MyTex. MyTex have this international research award for our undergrad students, like senior students. I think when they're in year 3 or year 4, they can apply, and also of course graduate students as well. So usually it's $6,000 for a 3 months international trip, supervised by faculty members. So they need to have a host supervisor and a home supervisor. So oftentimes we help them to connect with international universities to find a host supervisor and arrange all the placement. So they have to go through the application process. And we have been successful working with our tier candidates by applying for the award to go to China. And I see they have more than a dozen countries like Mexico, Brazil, Germany, like many other countries, students can apply any subject areas. So I think people can make use of this opportunity.
Thank you. And that reminded me too, it sounds like there was a SSHRC specific, very targeted, so you have to be meeting the needs of that particular SSHRC program, but there was a SSHRC program that might also provide some funding for certain kinds of travel. And Judy.
So I was just going to sort of put out there, I wonder if this might also be an opportunity where faculty who are interested could collaborate with other folks. So I'm just thinking, Shannon, you know, if a professor in English at the University of Windsor partnered with you, then you have your two faculty that can go and one can learn from the other. And not only does it provide opportunities for students to network with other students at institutions, but as faculty, I would just think that that would further enrich the program, not putting you on the spot. But I also think that across universities, but also within campus. So, you know, if we're taking a cohort to, let's say, Columbia, Chris, then, you know, is it possible that students who are working on Spanish and taking a Spanish course could have an intensive period in a Spanish-speaking country where they can further have an opportunity to develop, so that there's some interaction between the two faculties. There are some specific discipline components that would be unique to them, but that there's a way that some of the cultural and additional learning pieces that happen outside of sort of the academic that really take place in study abroads could be shared.
So,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, apologize, Shannon. Following on that, one of the things I've also done is timed some of our trips to other student groups going to that jungle center. And so we've had groups where we're in there in the middle of the jungle. Then we've had an entomology group there who would show us the bugs and scare our group. And then we'd also have groups that were working in the local community. And so you would be able to share not only about what their different experiences within the country are, but also they came from different environments. So I remember Michaela was there during a time when we had somebody from group from Alabama. So we had a tri-country cultural experience, and it was a lot of fun to then bring those different perspectives to bear, very similar to what you're talking about, bringing somebody with that background.
And what I was going to mention is much more modest than that. I love that idea. So I do work with 2 other Shakespeareans at other universities in Canada, but so far our trips are to Southern Ontario. So it doesn't qualify for international experiences, but it does have that same advantage. We can bring our students from our 3 universities, but it's also essentially 3 professors who are on at the same time. And one of the other Maymester experiences that I'd really like to build on next time was a professor in history at UPEI and one in biology. And they put on a history of botany course at Kew Gardens in London and at the Paris Botanical Gardens. So they had students who were both history students and science students and biology students, but they did have those 2 profs, and I think they got credit for 2 courses. So I think that's a really nice model too.
And I see in the chat, Priscilla Correa. Priscilla, you were asking about how do you deal with the language issues?
You know, I can answer that question, because going to Tanzania, they speak both English and Kiswahili. So what we do here before starting in September, we do bring a translator in or an instructor in to do some language lessons and to teach basic greetings and basic words that folks might need to know. But yeah, it is a challenge, but that becomes a part of the learning experience. What our student teachers often say at the end of the trip is that they've learned that language gets in the way sometimes, and they learn to teach non-verbally as well as, and they learn other ways of connecting with students and connecting across those boundaries. And again, they might have 10 words in a vocabulary. And so going into schools when they work with kids who come in from other countries and probably don't speak English as well, that they bring that kind of empathy. So then they talk about developing skills to teaching the whole day in a situation where they don't understand the children and children don't understand them, but they find other ways of communicating. And you see a lot of doing it through a lot of movement and body and dance and music and manipulatives and getting the kids hands-on, which is quite different from what the kids are used to. So they come back and incorporate that into their own teaching and realize that, yeah, sometimes language gets in the way.
Just to add to that, there's nothing better than learning a new language while being in the country itself. So I definitely picked up on some Spanish there as well. And even when I was teaching the local students about water conservation, you do use a lot of hand motions, and you don't realize also they do understand a decent amount based off of if you're showing them something. And now you do kind of like your, what is it, charades when you're explaining something. So those are also really valuable skills to have too when you're trying to communicate with students. And they're things that I also use in the classroom, which I'm sure others teacher candidates taking your course, Andrew, have also used.
So I will say that one of the things that Michaela had to do in her class is that at the end of learning about the ecohydrology and how to measure the instruments, I brought up the local public school, the local high school, I mean, and who spoke very little English. And I required our students to teach those students about how to measure in the jungle, which is a really tough assignment to do. And it does become that a bit of charades and a language piece. And then we had a great game of soccer in the parking lot afterwards. And then we went down a little bit later for another game. But that broke that ice. And in fact, language did not become a barrier whatsoever.
Thanks so much. We're just heading into the last few minutes, and a question had been raised earlier on, which I think ties into a few of the themes that have come up about this larger impact. There's the impact and the benefits that were mentioned at the beginning, but how do you assess all of these larger impacts? And I think, Michaela and Chris, you have written a paper or starting to write a paper on this, but I open it up to the team. How do you assess these larger impacts when you're doing study abroad?
So I'll start there. Michaela and I have a paper that is in review right now that is based upon the reflections of the students who went on the Costa Rica trip, but from Alabama, from Texas, from Windsor, from Guelph, all went to the exact same site and had very different experiences. And so we looked at their reflections as to how they were translated. But the first paper we ever did was back in 2009. And what we did is we started to realize that the students were doing better on their exams. And the reason why they were doing better on their exams after the trip, it was a 1-week lab-based trip, is that they started working really closely together. They weren't afraid to ask the teacher because that teacher was the same person strapped in a zip line screaming just like they were. And you break down these barriers and they got that hands-on experience. So Michaela at the very beginning, I think, really described that bigger impact in that way. It's not about what you learn in that moment. It's what you take back and those bonds and that social piece that really translate for the longer term. And if anybody's interested, I can share the papers that we have currently on how what we've measured.
That would be great, Chris. Thanks. And there was a quick question from Philippe. How far is that site from the local communities for you?
So it's just down the road, maybe a kilometer from a little tiny village, and then about 9 miles from to the local Red Cross in the larger village. And but you look one way and you're looking across the valley towards the city. You look the other way and it is just complete jungle as far as you can see. So you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere, but you know you've got the services there, but also the cultural opportunity as well.
Thanks, Chris. And so we're in our final 3 minutes for the session. So I wanted to take this time to say thank you so much to the panel, to Shalair for the organization, to Chris Bush for the organizing and bringing the group together for the grant. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it, and wishing all of you who have attended the best of luck, and definitely reach out to any of the resources and people that you will help you make this as effective an experience for you and for your students as possible. And we would love to have feedback, talking about feedback and reflection. I'm putting a link in here and we'll also send it to you by email. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and thank you to the panel.